Audio Jungle.
Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to talk about microservices. So microservices is one of the most common architectural style to build the applications. So before microservices, we have this monolith-based application development, and microservices becomes a new pattern to build applications. So in this video, we are going to talk about why do we need microservices, what problem does it actually solve, and what are the advantages and disadvantages with microservices. So before microservices, we have this monolith-based application development pattern. So with monolith, basically you have one single application, one single deployable unit, which might has multiple components embedded into each other. Say for example, this application might have module A, and another module could be module B, and C, D. Say for example, if you are building an application like e-commerce application, module A could be the one which takes responsibility for doing login, and the module B could be the one which is handling all the managing the orders and everything, and the module C might be managing the product catalog, and D might be managing the payment, right? So all these different functionalities of that application has been integrated and embedded into a single unit. That's the monolithic application. Now, there's a new trend towards the microservices. Instead of putting everything into a single application, you break down the application into smaller pieces, smaller deployable units. So you break down the modules into separate chunks, separate deployable units, and that's what we call as microservices. So in case of monolithic application, so the communication happens between the modules through a function call. So you just call another function from the module B, but in case of microservices, the communication between those services happens through the network. And there are a lot of differences between that. We will talk about that, and especially we will talk about what are the advantages of microservices and what are the problems with microservices. So let's say one of the primary advantage with microservices is faster time to market. So in case of monolithic application, you have one single application which contains all the components embedded into the same unit. Now, if you want to implement a new feature and deploy it into the production, you might be implementing this new feature into the module A, but you end up deploying the entire application into the production. And this monolithic application size might be huge, and when you deploy this entire monolithic application, it might take huge time. And after deploying into the production, if you face any bug, you have to roll back that to the previous version. And since again it's a monolith and the size is huge, the rollback activity will also take more time. But in case of a microservices based application, you make one change to the module A, you have to deploy only the module A into the production without disturbing any other modules. And when you separate the microservices, the monolithic application into smaller chunks, each microservices might become smaller in size and the deployment might be faster, and rolling back might also be faster. And that's one of the best advantage of microservices. And another thing is smaller testing surface. So with monolithic application, when you make changes to one of the module, you can't just test only that module, because this making changes to the module A might affect the other modules as well, because all the modules are embedded into the same unit and they are highly interconnected. So even though you make a small change to the module A, you may have to test the entire monolithic application to make sure nothing got broken. But in case of microservices, you make changes to the module A, you fix a bug, or either you implement a new feature, you may have to test only the module A, because the services are loosely connected to each other. So making any changes to the module A might not impact the other modules. So that's one of the advantages. And another advantage is smaller attack surface. Say for example, if some attacker gain access to one of the module in your monolithic application, consider they might gain access to the module A, and once they gain access to the module A, your entire application would be compromised, because they are all interconnected to each other. The data is interconnected to each other. So once they gain access to one module, they gain access to the entire application. But in case of microservices, you have a proper partition between the services. You may have a proper firewall configuration, you may have a proper network segmentation, and you may have proper TLS-based authentication between the microservices. So in that case, if the attacker gain access to the module A, he can only the module A is compromised without getting any other modules impacted. So that's one of the biggest advantages of microservices. You have a very smaller attack surface. And another advantage, one of my favorite advantages of microservices, the developers have the freedom to choose any programming language to build the services. Say, for example, you can use Node.js for module A and Java for module B, which is possible in case of microservices. But in case of monolithic application development, you can't use multiple programming languages. You have to stick to one single programming language for all your components. But in case of microservices, you can leverage the power of each programming language for your requirements. Say, for example, if the module C is consuming more system power, like it is consuming more CPU and memory, then you might consider using C++ or Golang for building the microservice C. And in case if module A is more functional and you think it has to be more readable and more testable, you might be consider choosing Java or Node.js for module A. So you have that freedom of being polyglot in microservices. And another advantage is microservices is a decentralized pattern, right? So if anything goes wrong with one part of your application, only that particular part goes down. Say, for example, if there is a bug in module A, say module A, and it caused the entire application to go down. In case of monolith application, if there is a bug in A and your entire application will go down and your end users cannot use any of the services of your application. But in case of microservices, because of a bug, if the module A goes down, the end users can still utilize the other functionalities of the other modules because only the A goes down, not the other modules. But in case of monolithic, a single bug in one module would bring the entire application down. So these are all some of the advantages of microservices, but microservices also comes with some disadvantages. Like one of the important problem with microservices is the communication. The communication is unreliable in microservices. So in monolithic application, how do we communicate? How the modules communicate to each other? So if A wants to talk to B, it is just a function call, right? So whenever we say it's an individual module or a component, in case of monolith, the module is kind of another class, or it could be just another library, right? So if you want to communicate between the modules, module A would just call another function in the module B. And that is a very reliable way of communicating. If you call a function, 100% the function will be executed. But in case of microservices, if the module A wants to talk to B, the communication has to happen through the network. And we all know that network is one of the most unreliable factor in infrastructure. So if you call the module B, through the communication could happen through a HTTP API or through RPC, right? And there are a lot of factors that could affect your communication, like the network could be unavailable, there might be some issues in the firewall configuration, or some issues in the TLS certificate configuration. So the communication might fail. There are a lot of opportunities for that. So that's one of the biggest problem with microservices, that the network is unreliable. And another problem with microservices is the more number of services that you are increasing, the more complex the integration will become, right? Because in case of monolith, all your modules are just interconnected through function calls, and it is existing within a single application. So the number of modules you're increasing will not be a bigger problem in terms of integration. But in case of microservices, once you increase the number of services, the integration will become more complex because you have to have a proper network segmentation. You need to ensure that there is a proper authentication mechanism between the services, either through a TLS termination or through a basic traditional authentication. So there are a lot of factors that we need to consider when we interconnect multiple microservices. So the integration becomes more complex in terms of microservices. But even if there are a lot of disadvantages with the microservices, there are a lot of patterns, practices, and tools that are available today to overcome all those difficulties. So because of that, microservices becomes one of the default architecture style to do the application development. So in this video, we talked about microservices and what are the advantages and disadvantages of that. So I have posted some links and articles to learn more about the microservices. Thank you so much for watching.
Audio Jungle.